Yeah, welcome to the 36 Degrees North webinar on communications during COVID-19. And we have Nicole Morgan and Jon Schroeder with us, who are going to be sharing all of their wonderful insights with us, expertise, guru-ness about communications and how do we do that well in the midst of a pandemic that's going on. And how we'll do, if you'd like to engage with a question during this webinar, encourage you to go down to the chat button beneath, and you can actually put a question on there and we'll jump into that question during this webinar. Does that sound good? I guess I can't see everyone else. It sounds good to me. Does that sound good to you guys?
Yeah.
Good.
Yep, sounds good to me.
Awesome. Well, I think let's go ahead and get started. And as we go along, like I mentioned, please jump in with questions. So what we really want to address is really how do we communicate during COVID-19? How do we have good messaging? And my first question here will be for Nicole. Nicole, you actually spoke about this at a webinar that we did 2 weeks ago. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your thoughts. And you just brought a lot of insight to that as we were on our 36 Degrees North webinar 2 weeks ago. And my question is, how do you advertise during COVID-19 without being tone deaf to the situation that's going on and is affecting all of us?
Yeah, so I think it's been interesting to kind of see how communication has evolved over the last month. Step number one that we're already kind of past now is knowing when to pull the plug on your kind of planned out communications efforts. And hopefully people have figured that out by now. But I think that we were kind of in a unique situation here because it was impacting so many other areas of the country before it was really impacting Oklahoma. And so I think we were really in this kind of chicken and egg situation of, do we pull things? Do we not? When are things going to get bad? And then everything kind of hit the fan overnight, seemingly. So I think just as I've been consuming communications and we've been working with our clients, what we've really been telling people is that whatever you're communicating, it really needs to be relevant. And unfortunately, right now, that means it has to have some kind of tie or sensitivity to the current situation. So if you're going to send an email, for example, just a blanket email about COVID-19 and what you're doing is not necessarily relevant to people. But maybe there is something about the way that people are interacting with you that's going to change. I think Starbucks sent out a really great email very early on that acknowledged what the typical customer experience is like at Starbucks, and then how people could expect that to be different. So in a way, they were still saying, you can still come here and we're still serving coffee, but the way that you're going to get that is going to look a little different than what you're used to. So to me, that was a great example of someone being really relevant, still being able to sell their product, but also being aware of the situation that everyone's in. I think that clothing stores have been the worst, honestly. You know, we're in a situation where I was looking at an article from the Tulsa World this morning where, you know, we had like 85% increase of unemployment claims in 1 week. And yet I'm getting emails from clothing stores constantly that are like, hey, here's, you know, 70% off of pajama pants. I'm like fully aware that I'm wearing pajama pants all the time, but I'm also not going to spend money on more right now. And it just, to me, that just comes off as very insensitive to the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jon, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult because we are in a climate where, as Nicole was pointing out, where, you know, retailers are struggling to have any kind of sales versus what their normal is, right? And having some sensitivity is difficult because I don't, honestly, I was looking through the questions for today, and I really feel like the answer for most of it, and maybe we'll have different answers as the questions come about, but is just having empathy for where people are at.
Right.
I mean, people are, we have clients all across the nation, and I think that it's different for somebody that's in New York than someone who's in Oklahoma right now. Oklahoma could get worse than it is right now. I hope it doesn't, but I think we need to be prepared for that, and messaging and caring for kind of aligning with what our government officials are saying we should be doing is really, and positioning your business as best we can to continue to operate without being reckless, I think and having, as Nicole is pointing out, like, yes, I understand. I'm wearing pajama pants every day. I don't need another pair. I don't even care that they're 75% off. Like, stop it. Like, it's just, it's a wild scramble. So yeah, I would just agree with Nicole for sure.
Yeah. A certain level of sensitivity here is just imperative. And I even saw NPR just put out an article about Lowe's, and how Lowe's was essentially trying to bait people to come into their stores because everybody's doing all this yard work. And so it's just really interesting of like, just how do we communicate and message properly while also really like knowing the temperature of what's going on in our state, in our city, and in our country too. So Jon, my next question for you here is social media advertising more or less effective during quarantine 2020?
Yeah. So I'm going to say it's both more and less. If you have a product that aligns with our current public's needs, it is probably the easiest inroad to serving those people the right way, in a way that's never happened before, because media spend budgets have been pulled in a lot of different categories, and there hasn't been, and everyone's really fearful. So everyone that's goes out and spends money on advertising on a normal basis, they're not spending. So efficient and effective, if the product is aligned with the real needs of kind of this quarantine COVID-19 time period that we're in, then it's incredibly efficient and effective. We've run a few different ads for organizations that are trying to do events online, and the most efficient spend I've seen in a long time. I mean, less than $1 for people signing up saying that they want to go to an event. I mean, that's a digital event, but it's really interesting. I would say if you're running advertising and you're tone deaf to the situation of your or the environment that your buying public is in, then they will probably be even higher, because people would be ticked. So.
Yeah, Nicole, do you want to weigh in here too?
Well, so I've been doing a lot of reading over the last week. I think I've probably listened to more webinars and read more articles than I have in the time that I started Resolute. But there was an article that I read the other day that was talking about this topic in particular, and was saying, for some brands, like, being sensitive means you need to be comfortable with just not saying anything right now. And I think
say amen to that.
Huh?
Can I say amen to that?
Yeah.
Like, some people just need to not do anything. It's okay.
Yeah. And where I think that's interesting from mine and Jon's perspective is obviously that impacts our bottom line to tell a client, hey, like you shouldn't be running anything right now, or we should hit pause on this, or we should delay this.
Right.
But it's the right thing to do. And so yes, everyone's going to suffer in making those decisions, but the downfall of not following that practice is probably going to be a lot worse and a lot more damaging than if you kind of, put a stake in the ground and just do what's right.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a question that just came in here in response to the first question. It's how will communications transition back to normal, and how do we go from being sensitive to selling again? So this is almost like future forecasting here.
Yeah.
How do we pivot for right now, and then how do we pivot forward once we can come out of our homes?
I have a couple of different ways to answer that, but maybe if that anonymous attendee could, if there's a specific industry, because I think it kind of depends on the industry. So let me answer it as if it was a local business. So if it's a local business that has a storefront, I think we can point to like everyone's kind of overwhelmed with like our stance on COVID emails. Like those are really difficult because it's like, oh, I didn't know I needed to know the Gap's, stance on COVID. But it is nice to know what they're doing if I wanted to go buy, pajama pants. So I think I think as far as transition, it's kind of industry specific. So like we have some friends that own Ida Red. I've been thinking about them a lot. And like Antoinette's that we've all visited being at 36. And how do they transition? One's food business, one is a local business that has stuff that people love, specifically Oklahoma based, right? I kind of think that being authentic about the measures that you're taking as a business owner and saying, we're committed, and even going on video, I think is not a bad thing. Like going on video and saying like, this is where we're at. I think some of them are doing a really good job of saying, this is the situation we're in. It's unique. We're gonna start providing curbside pickup. I'm sure Ida Red didn't, when they started their business, didn't go, what we should do to really boost sales is curbside pickup. Everyone's going to need that and want that from us. So I think it's going to be pretty industry specific, how you communicate with your already buying customers and then potential customers as well. I think I'll park it there. Nicole?
I'll build on what you said in that you've given some really great examples of where businesses have had to get creative about how they can continue to do what they do. And maybe it hasn't been to the level, certainly of sales or being able to employ people like they typically would, but people have gotten really creative. And so I don't think this is going to be a situation where as much as I would love for it to be that the switch just flips and all of a sudden everything's back to normal. There's definitely going to be a transition, and what that looks like in terms of events and how many people can be, in one place together versus when it's deemed safe for people to go back to their offices. All of that remains to be seen and is going to be a transition. And so I think that, different things that companies have put into place to kind of continue to keep the ball moving as best they can in this time, that will just kind of continue to move and snowball. And maybe there will be some service areas or some ways in which they've been communicating with people that they haven't done before that are actually working really well. And particularly for the restaurant industry. And again, Research had a news article the other day where they were saying our industry is never going to be the same. I mean, you just think about the cleanliness practices that they've had to put into place and how close people sit together. And I mean, it's going to be a long time before people are comfortable doing that again. So
Right.
I think we've all got to adjust to what the new normal is. And I think that we've also learned some things in the process.
Yeah. Another question coming across the wire here from the wonderful Abby Moreno. Any tips on communicating with teams, and specifically how to motivate and appreciate team members' efforts while still holding performance expectations?
So we have not, Jon, you guys have been a lot more virtual, I think, than we have, just because you have different locations. So you probably have a lot to add to this. We've always kind of been set up to operate virtually to an extent. We have pretty flexible hours, and people can work from home if they need to, or, you know, if they need to cut out early or whatever. And we have different measures that we've put into place to keep tabs on what's going on. But we've ramped up on a lot of those things. For example, like we hadn't used Slack since we were at 36 degrees north. We've implemented that again, and it's actually been really great. I mean, that's a great example of something that we'll probably continue to do after we're done with the situation. We've, like any of our weekly meetings that we have, we've kicked those up to twice a week. I think that there's a balance that we all need to have as leaders and business owners between knowing what's going on and making sure that people are being productive, and then also having trust in people and them not feeling like they're being micromanaged. So I'm in some groups for other PR firm owners kind of nationally, and there were some companies that this was very new for them. They'd never worked remotely, and so they were having to put a lot of these processes into place. And one of them was like, you should have a meeting every morning with your team and talk about everything that they're doing. And to me, if I were in that situation, I were an employee, I'd be like, well, they don't trust me to get my stuff done. But that's in my business. That might not be the same way in other people's business. But I think just finding that balance of how you can check in with people on a work related, but also on a personal level. We did our virtual happy hour last week, and we're going to do yoga next week. And we did a virtual lunch and some other ways to just check in and stay connected. But Jon, you probably have a lot more to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, we're a pretty small team. And like Nicole said, we've been basically remote since we started 7 years ago. So I've actually found that this transition has helped me a little bit focus. And what I've recognized with others, we've gone from suggested social distancing to stay at home. And so there's a gap. There's some different things that happened. We've got some people who are very active in their communities that don't get to do that right now. We've got some people who exercise every day, and that involves a climbing wall, and like he doesn't get to do that. And like, so there are all those experiences that we've had in our, I mean, like, even for me, like my daily routine is like stopping at Double Shot almost every day. Like almost every day, they know what I have a routine. And so what we've done at Ribbow is whether we need it or not, we take some time together, and it's actually less of a business meeting and more of a like, we haven't gotten as creative as like a happy hour or a yoga. We probably should. It's more, honestly, it's more like group counseling, where, or family counseling, like where we're just like, hey, this is, the kids are outside, and like, it was warm the other day, and I walked outside for lunch, like to get lunch. The kids are already outside, Shannon's outside, and our kids are just naked outside. And I was just like, what is going on? And it's just, reminding ourselves that we're just humans in the middle of this craziness. And we're lonely. We're excited to try to help people. And there's, I think just connecting on a real human basis is so important. Whether structured or, even just touching base with a coworker on a regular basis. I mean, I think it's just so important. So I think that just helps the team. So that's, I don't know. Ours is so much less structured than many. So
but I think it's also just important to remember that, like you said, we're all humans, and the way that we are feeling about the situation, even from one day to the next, varies so much.
Yeah.
And so I've really tried to be, I'm typically someone who's rushing from one thing to the next to the next. And I've tried to be really mindful of asking people just how are you? You know, what's going on, or how are you feeling today? And just listening to how people are dealing with certain situations that are going on, because it's just interesting, you know, life still happens like it normally does. And yet we're having to deal with that in isolation, where we normally would be able to go grab coffee with a friend or complain about it to our coworker, or, you know, whatever it may be. And people just don't have that opportunity right now, or it's a lot harder to come by that.
Yeah. I think this is really good advice, and a really good question from Abby too. And what we're like acknowledging is we're not just working from home and adjusting to that, but we're working from home in the middle of a crisis. Yeah. And I just think that's like a good acknowledgement for all teams, and even just to be able to check on other team members as well. All right, our next question. Nicole, this is specifically for you, and it's just, what are some tips that entrepreneurs should know about specifically messaging for newsletters and website updates and social media? Just what are some tips that you would give to our entrepreneurs?
So, I mean, the short answer is I don't think anything's changed. I mean, if you were going to do any of that, the content that you're putting out should be relevant to people. It should be helpful. It shouldn't just be blasting out sales messaging. It should be reaching people on a personal level. It's going to perform a lot better that way. People are going to engage with it. They're going to look for additional content if it kind of checks all those boxes. So I asked for the questions ahead of time so I could be prepared, but I wanted to be able to have some examples. And one that I thought really captured this was Growing Together. So they're a nonprofit that works in Kendall Whittier. They really align resources in that area specifically to try to help kids in the neighborhood. And we do a newsletter for them every month. So when this kind of all hit the fan, it was right before their newsletter went out. And, you know, all of a sudden it seemed very irrelevant. And, you know, do we really want to send out a newsletter that talks about all these great things we've been doing in the neighborhood, when that's not really the headspace people are in? And it's also not really a reality right now. And so we retooled that newsletter to specifically talk about what they do best, which is being a good neighbor. And so the executive director, we had an article from him to kind of start out the newsletter that's about, you know, a little bit about this time. And then also here, you know, 10 things you could be doing to be a good neighbor, whether that's supporting a local business in Kendall Whittier, whether that's running errands for a more vulnerable neighbor who really shouldn't be getting out right now, or sending a card to someone who needs a bright spot. And once we had that in the newsletter, then actually when you scroll down, a lot of the other content didn't change. It was still about things that they had been doing in the neighborhood. They even had a box at the very bottom where if you wanted to donate or give money to support them, you could. But having that intro that was very relevant and had some kind of a current tie really helped make that, that newsletter work.
Cool. Jon, any thoughts here as well?
To be honest, it's out of my realm of expertise. I completely agree with Nicole. I just keep coming back to, God, I wish I could cuss. Authentic AF. I'll say it that way. Like, cool. If you going out and saying, you know, just that you're out helping people and you have a stance on what you're doing and what your business is doing. And I mean, I think, you know, the restaurant industry's hit really hard. Going out to your community and saying, this is where we're at. We've had to cut our staff by this. This is where we're at. our income has gone down 99% or whatever it is, and this is how you can support us. If there's a plan for that, I think that goes a long way. As opposed to saying, we have hamburgers for sale. Like, I can make a hamburger at home, but what I can't do is support my neighbor by buying from their business.
Right.
Like, that's what they need. We can do that. So
yeah, that's really good advice, and thank you for keeping our 36 webinars PG. We really appreciate that.
I do my best.
Yeah. We still have a little bit more time left, so we'll see how it goes. All right, Jon, this next question's for you here. How can we utilize SEO to drive business to our websites during COVID-19?
So this is a wild question. So it's wild because Facebook and Google and I believe Amazon have now all basically quarantined those keywords. So I know that the question's not specifically, PPE or where to find PPE or things like that, but there's not really, I don't know that there's anything on an SEO front or SEM front, the difference being one's organic, one's paid, that really makes sense. Actually, one of our 36 North, I'm blanking on Nozak, is that the name?
Yeah, William Nozak.
He'd probably be a great resource for the SEO side of that, because I really don't know. I know that Google has been very, very adamant about making sure that nobody's out profiteering on this kind of stuff. So I don't know a good answer to that. So I apologize for not being prepared on that one.
Yeah. All right. Question for both of you guys. How much messaging is too much messaging during COVID-19? And essentially, like, how do we avoid update fatigue?
That's a good question. Nicole, you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. I think people right now need to see hope in their timelines. They need to see resilience, desired outcomes. Like, all of us want to see our favorite businesses survive. So if I see one video from a local business and they have figured out a way to appropriately, safely update their business so that they can make it through this time period and keep people, with some kind of income, then I'm going to do my darndest to help, support them. So how much is too much? I don't know. Keep it simple. The most I would feel comfortable suggesting is once a day, having some kind of post. The least I would say is once a week. I mean, I don't know where you sit with that, Nicole.
I would kind of go back to what you were saying earlier, where I think it depends on the business.
Yeah.
And how you're communicating with people. So, if you're constantly sending emails about how your business is dealing with COVID-19, at this point, that's white noise. So that's too much, and you need to move on to something else. But I think that there are some organizations that have been really creative in the ways that they're communicating. I took a virtual tour of Buckingham Palace last night with my family. that was cool. And I never would have gone to that website otherwise. And I am a little bit of a royal watcher, so it was relevant to me. But I would love to see more content like that. The National Cowboy Museum, Tim, the security guard, I can't get enough of what he's posting. And I'm like, they're going to run out of stuff in that museum to post about pretty soon. But it's funny content, and it's a bright spot, and you see people from Australia commenting on there, and it's bringing, a great light to Oklahoma when we're currently on the map for Tiger King, let's talk about Tim, the security guard. So, that kind of information I love. But if it's not relevant and it's not sensitive and it's not all the things that we've talked about, then it's probably better to hit pause and kind of rethink how you're communicating with people, because it's, if you're not seeing engagement, there's probably a reason why.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I want to give a little bit more time here for question and answer. So if you are, you have a question for Nicole or Jon, if you want to send that over.
Yeah, should we just start calling attendees out by name?
I think so. Yeah.
Mark, come on, buddy. I miss you.
Yeah.
Come on, man. What do you got?
Really,
Sarah,
this is...
Or TJ. TJ, I don't know you, but nice to meet you.
Really, this is just our wonder is Mark on the call right now,
Yeah.
Okay. He is on the call. What's the question? The kids are crying. Mark, we just wanted to know if you had any questions about childcare during quarantine 2020. No. We were just wanting to see if you had any questions about communication. Save me. Yes.
Save me. Send virtual babysitter.
Yeah.
Man,
all right.
Let's talk about that while we wait for questions. What is let's just totally go off subject. What's your favorite way to distract your kids while you're on a conference call?
Well, mine just walked in. I don't know if you guys heard all that, because it was dance class time. So Dad was missing for a minute. So I would love to know what the answer is.
Yeah, I think this is the elusive answer here. This is another webinar that we will do, is how do you work from home with several kids going crazy. We have a couple more questions here. Sarah from Bigsby, Oklahoma just said, any tips for promoting virtual events?
Sure. Yeah, if it's serving the community, then pointing to probably Facebook ads is the easiest way. What was the setup on this? I have been head down on the other stuff. What's the strategy for these virtual events? And is this the kind of virtual event we're talking about? Maybe.
I know from 36 Degrees North's perspective, she said yes, email so far. But we've just run it through all of our normal member channels, and really wanting to promote it first within our 36 Degrees North community, and then hitting the broader Facebook world, Tulsa world after that.
Cool. Yeah, I think if there's a landing page and/or did you guys set it up through Eventbrite or something like that? That's how you guys normally do physical events.
We do. She said not for this one.
Not this one. Yeah, I mean, I would suggest setting it up the same or similar way as an in-person event, and just run ads to that event so everybody gets notification. And it's pretty easy to set up within Facebook.
I would just also think about how you're doing your virtual events. I feel like I've seen some really great examples of how to maybe something that was going to happen in person and how they translated it to a virtual event. And then I've seen some others that are just really complicated and kind of hard for people to follow along with. And the format just doesn't quite translate. And I think especially if you have a nonprofit or something where you have sponsors that you're still trying to recognize, think through that and like, don't be too hasty about it just to get it done. Because logistically, I think we have to rethink some of those things too.
Yeah. Question from Carmen here, and then Mark has chimed in as well. So we'll go with Carmen first. What do we need to know about chatbots during this time? Or let's talk about chatbots.
Are you all going to talk about chatbots? I don't know if I understand the question exactly. So I would be a little cautious with them currently, just because chatbots are not innately trained to deal with COVID-19. I'm not sure specifically what the question is. I think it is a good time if you're a business owner to go through and learn about the things that a chatbot would be good for. Specifically, I would focus on things like hours of operation. If you do local pickup, curbside pickup, like you don't need to answer that day over day. It would be fine if a chatbot answered that for you, right? I'm trying to think of the other use cases, because chatbots can either be very simple and kind of a quick answer, hours change, curbside pickup, any of those things, shipping, are all those things possible? Or they can be really complex, and they can, there are some companies that make it so that you can actually plug in AI so it understands sentiment analysis and stuff like that. But I'm not sure I understand the question beyond that. Sorry.
Well, Carmen, I hope that was helpful. Mark's got a question. It is, how do you use...
Carmen, if that didn't answer your question, either Daniel, will you connect us and I'll answer that more succinctly if there's something bigger. So glad to do that.
Sounds good. All right, Mark's question: how do you stop your kids from crying? No, he has. What do you do if you have inventory to sell and that's the only way to survive? For example, clothing companies being tone deaf, but have product to move, and how do you avoid bankruptcy? So we discussed that a little bit earlier, but I think Mark's just digging into like a really specific industry question here. So do you guys have thoughts on that?
I think Nicole should answer because she's the one that's not buying the pajama pants.
Yeah.
I've purchased a ton. I'm just kidding.
So send all your emails to Jon is the answer.
Yeah, send all those emails to Jon.
No, it's a really good question, because I think that's the nut that we're all kind of trying to crack, right? Like, we want to keep things moving, and at the same time, what's the best way to do that? What's the best time? So I think that's a really hard one. I think as things are starting to relax and people are settling into the normal, then it becomes more appropriate. I think when everybody's hair was on fire, it was not appropriate. And so trying to just think through things day by day, as things loosen up, I think that it becomes a better time to be selling some of those things, but again, still being sensitive to it. And there was something else I was going to say and I've lost it.
I can take a swing at it while you think about it. I think it depends on what scale we're talking about. If this was Gap or alike, I would probably be aligning with a local charity that is doing something really important, and almost being unapologetic and saying, we're not lowering our prices. If you are able to, we are keeping our prices the same, and by doing that, we have the ability to do X. at a local level. And I think at the, I said local level. I mean, it could be done, I guess, with a local, with local inventory as well. But I think trying to push sales right now is going to be really tough without an impact story. I think you could win on an impact story, and then you have to deliver. Like you have to be able to, like, even if it's shot on your iPhone, like, hey, we just dropped off X for those in need. You know, authenticity goes a lot farther than production value and 6K video. So
I think that one is also kind of an industry specific one. So like if you're a restaurant, obviously you have inventory that has a shelf life. So, I mean, I know friends who went and bought their stuff, their groceries from a restaurant versus going to the grocery store. That was a great way for them to still, you know, that food didn't go to waste. They were able to, I know it's not anywhere near what they would have made had they still been completely operational, but it was a great way for them to still be compensated for some of that. You know, versus if you're a clothing store, that stuff can have a little longer shelf life. And I think you guys are doing another webinar on this, but obviously there are all of these support mechanisms that are in place right now, the zero interest loans that the city of Tulsa is doing, the payment protection program, the SBA loans that are out. So as much as like none of us want to have to go there, for some, that's just the reality of trying to maintain, you know, to be able to at least put a Band-Aid on it until we can get through, because for some industries, that's just harder than others to be able to keep going.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I hope that was helpful, and Godspeed on all the parenting during this time, and Godspeed to all of us too. I think that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you for joining us. Mark says, thanks. You're welcome, brother. Thank you guys for joining us for this communications webinar. Yeah, Nicole, Jon, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. This was good, awesome content, and appreciated just the tenor of saying, be authentic, and that will translate in your messaging. So thank you guys. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you later. Stay safe.
Bye.
See y'all. Have a good day.